Hi guys. That was a good session, the previous one. Lots of interesting anecdotes, lots of interesting questions that you ask yourself about human behavior, people, the nature of people, what they behave like. Do you know what AI employs the most of? What kind of people in what kind of workspaces do you think AI employs? AI, the field of AI. Where is the biggest pool of people? From what kind of skill sets are they coming from? The one who have too many questions. That sounds like ChatGPT. Data science, yeah. Psychology, yes. Behavioral science, yes. Anthropology. Statistics. Yes, actually, if you look at it, this is the order. The psychologists, the anthropologists, and the behavioral scientists that work in the field of AI are far more than the developers and the data scientists and the analysts. So that's the world of AI. Now, why is that interesting? Can we go to the, yeah, can I get the clicker? Yeah, thanks. Great. Now, why is that interesting? Because human nature is fascinating, right? So can you all close your eyes? Can you all think of what a Govinda movie looks like? Yeah? Now can you think yellow, red, bright colors, fancy dance moves, right? Can you all imagine what a Mithunda movie could look like? Have you all got the disco dancer view in your heads? Do you see how interestingly our minds work, right? The fact that we've got these little boxes that put people into those spaces. The minute I keep saying the Malu thing of finding a Malu voice somewhere in the room and the clannish feel of, oh, where are you from, being the first question that gets asked. It happens in many communities. I'm just speaking out of Malu because I'm one and nobody can beat me up for laughing at myself. So when you look at bias, bias is so inherently present within all of us, to the point that children as young as 3 years old already have biases that set into them. The formative years, the first 6 to 8 months, is when children still don't have biases about their gender and all of that. But from the 8-month period onwards, the biases that we grow up with start forming. So let's understand bias really. What do you think is bias? We speak a lot about bias. Or any of you have attended like a bias training in the organization, conscious, unconscious bias? Yeah, so what does bias really speak about? Bias speaks about the fact that we have a certain colored lens for a certain colored community. There is a prejudice that is set in. Some of these could be conscious biases, which we imbibe as we grow. Some of them are very unconscious because you don't even realize that you're discriminating against somebody, and that inherently sets in. It's important to understand bias because when you think about bias from a point of view of AI, and what AI and machines are learning, where are they learning from? From data. Where is the data collected from? People. So when we're looking at data and when data is being collected from people and people are actually feeding the input into AI, there's automatic transformation and transmission of the biases that we hold within us into these systems. Now, human bias is scary at the level that it is. But imagine a very deep-seated machine learning, algorithm-based AI functioning from a space of bias, which is also increasingly, and by the way, ChatGPT searches already show that. When you look for Hitler, ChatGPT searches are very, very, dark about Hitler's history, and there's a lot of negative commentary that comes up. But when you look at Winston Churchill, it's very whitewashed. Similarly, when you search, so, how many of you here have used ChatGPT, are using ChatGPT, have used ChatGPT for presentations? Remember that every time you're using it, there is a certain lens of color that's come into it because of the spaces that it's picking up information from, and that's the internet, and the internet has no locks or gatekeepers on how information is being processed or said. When I say newspapers, if I say Times of India, there's a very very bright visual that comes up for everybody? When I say the wire, is there a similar sort of a visual that's coming up for people? So you see how you feel about that also talks about your inherent bias towards a certain party, towards a certain... So when there is information like that that is so gray, and when there's perspectives that's being built on, what happens is a systemic distortion. So the statistical result that is coming in from a space like that has got its derivatives very steeped in this bias. Can you all pick up your phones and just, on your search windows, just type nurse? Nurse. Just look at the images that show up. How many male images do you see? One on the search page, right? Okay. Now on the same window, type software engineer or software developer. How many women do you see? 1, 3. Yeah. Another one that I'll ask you to try at a later time is when a woman says no, she means yes, is what 29 pages of Google will tell you. I'll ask the women in this room, whenever you've said no, have you ever meant yes? Thank you. I think I've made my point. But when you look at bias in context of what we're speaking about, it is a disproportionate amount of weight in favor or against an idea or a thing, okay? Especially in the US, what is the first thing that you can think about which is very in your face when it comes to biases? Racial bias, right? Biases can be innate or learned. People may develop biases for or against an individual, a group, or a belief. In science and engineering, a bias is a systemic error. And these systemic errors are also imbibed or latent. I want to show you a video, but I don't know. Can you guys just play this for me from the screen? Just hit the play button. Okay, forget it. It's basically talking about cognitive bias and how cognitive bias enters the system. So when you're thinking, when you're processing information, when you're interpreting information that you have access to, there is an immediate impact on the judgment and the decision that you make. Like the example that I gave you of, if I were to ask you to describe a movie in a Rajkumar style versus a Govinda style versus an Amir Khan style, there would be very distinctive differences to the way you would portray them. Now there, the good news is, it's like you're putting on and taking off a lens. So you're aware of the fact that you're adding that lens and you're not adding the lens. But what happens when you're not aware? What happens when it's innately wired like that? You're erasing information that is so deeply nuanced that you're losing out on the world that would be without the bias. Why is bias not such a good thing? Can you all think of reasons why? Yes, it's discriminative, so it's not equal, yes? Leads to inappropriate decision making. You're not cohesive in your thinking. You're thinking with that particular lens on, so your decision making is impacted. It limits your thought process. It sets a different mental map, right? Don't you all realize the connection between customer experience and each one of the descriptions that you just gave me? The minute you look at biased AI that's working on customer samples, your customer experience is limited because automatically the thinking, the thought process, the way you're assuming people to behave is coming from a space of a decision and a judgment that is coming from a space of latent inherent bias, whether it's on the system or an anticipated bias on the customer's end. The human brain is powerful, but it is subject to limitations. When you look at cognitive biases, it's your brain's need. It's a human innate need to sort of simplify what we're taking in, to sort of put it into something that's familiar, right? So it's consciously trying to make your processing simpler. So that's the brain's need to do so. Now, if you don't intervene with the brain, you have actually opened up a can of worms or Pandora's box or whatever you want to call it, because your decisions then suddenly become clouded by what you think is the right thing or the not so right thing. How many of us live in a black and white world? None of us. The world is as gray with as many shades, 50, 500, 5,000, whatever, the books that get written on. And when we're trying to eliminate bias, it's for us to be able to see the world with the fact that it is shades of gray and not black and white. The brain's need to make it black and white, the words right, wrong, are all coming from spaces of us. Yes, if you talk about ethics, there is a certain idea of construct of what's okay, what's not okay, what is ethical, what's not ethical. I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about the need for this black and white world which does not exist. So some of these biases are related to memory. The way you remember an event may be biased based on a number of reasons, and that in turn can lead biased thinking and decision making. I'll give you an example. We were playing, there was this baby shower, and there were all of these little kids who were playing, and there was a question on who's going to change the diaper. There were 2 boys and I think 5 girls, and everybody said, Mama will change the diaper. Changing a diaper is not a gender-specific role. Parenting is not a gender-specific role. But the conditioning of the societal lens that comes in when children are growing up and watching what they are watching and seeing in multiple collective spaces is reinforcing their thinking about stereotypical roles. And that's what comes from memory. If I have seen my mother do this several hundred times over, the fact that I may see my father do this 1 or 2 times is an aberration. So I will take what is my truth and my reality to come from the space of where it has repeated itself time and time over and again, and that becomes the space that I approach anything from. Right? In psychology, it's called the map. We all have psychographic maps. Anything that we're dealing with is either sitting in our bodies or is sitting in our psychogeography. Our psychogeography is the space around us. So if I were to ask you to think of an issue and ask you to bring attention to it, it would be somewhere in your body or it would be somewhere around you. That's how deeply the brain invests in learning and functioning and processing. And whatever you tell yourself that many times over becomes your truth. And when this collective truth is not intervened on, when work has not been done on this, and when that becomes collective data that goes into a machine, which is now learning based on this, which is now performing acts based on this, which is now becoming artificial intelligence, which is going to dictate terms and which is going to take calls based on this, that's when there's a problem. So artificial intelligence, one of the biggest or the most problematic issues that came up initially when it started getting used was in the US defense system, when they started using this in criminal courts to process cases. Okay, what they recognized was the fact that if you did not belong to the stereotypical white American male / woman, automatically there were parameters that the machine had learned, and if you were colored and if you were African American, the fact that you could actually get lower ratings for yourself, even in the criminal mechanism and the system, compared to your white counterparts for the same level of crimes, was different. So what are you doing? You're eliminating the ability to have a world where the freedom to take choices based on actual parameters of measurement is taken away, and this bias has coming. Another example, Amazon spent years building a recruitment system to hire people without really looking at their gender. Okay, so the resumes wouldn't have gender. But what they recognized was the fact that words like executed would come in a lot more in male resumes, and the AI, forget the gender, had picked up the language that a particular gender used, and there were more men being hired anyway. Because it didn't have any more to do with the gender stated on the resume, but it had to do with the language that the gender used, and that was what AI picked up from the people that it learned machine learning from, or who coded into it their own biases against men and women. So they actually had to redo and rehash the entire project again because it didn't serve the purpose. So when you look at cognitive biases which are related to problems of attention, attention is a limited resource. We were just talking about how we need to have Wi-Fi even on trains to wait because it takes our mind away. People are very selective about what they pay attention to. Algorithms have become very intuitive. If you've seen, like Netflix, like the Netflix example, if you've seen a certain kind of format of a program, the constant reminders that will come to you is from the same kind of genres. Because even AI is trying to slot you all into boxes. The algorithms want to learn more about you. They want to know what you're watching, how you're watching, track what you're watching, push what it wants you to watch, and the same thing is true of brands as well. Now, this is counterintuitive because when you're tackling cognitive bias, you're removing choice. When you're addressing the room, you're removing or eliminating choice from their own bandwidth, which could probably give you a more diverse set of people/interests to work with. So there are limits in the mind's attention. There are individual motivations. I like, dislike, I prefer, don't prefer. There's social pressure, which we all see, especially in social media consumption of younger girls and younger women. You see a lot of, biases again about the bodies and body types and acceptance of bodies. Mental shortcuts, which are called heuristics, are also things that play into bias. Now, let me give you an example. There's this very powerful visual of a chubby little girl who's sitting down on the floor with a magazine in front of her open. And she is, she's maybe 5 or 6 years old. And she's looking at the women on the magazine. And she's got a scissor. And she's holding her tummy. And she's got the scissor to her tummy like this. The problem with subliminal messaging that is being picked up constantly by people around us, and especially by the impact of social media on younger minds, is also a reflection of the world that AI could potentially build from a customer experience perspective. Do you really want to slot your customer down to such a degree that you're pushing them to the edge of inability to recognize who they are, what their bodies are, what their minds are working with? Do you want them to be red flower pots all lined up in a row? That's a good question to ask when you talk about ethics and when you talk about what you're trying to apply. Now, this is not a problem at the level of where we operate on pushing marketing gimmicks or pushing marketing campaigns out to customers, but I think it comes a little bit before that. It comes at the space of when the AI is learning what it's learning, and interventions are needed at that level for us to really look at what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And just like diversity and inclusion is proven to help improve businesses, it's proven that biased AI can derail businesses. Statistically proven that AI bias, when it comes into the customer experience space, actually numerically devalues and risks your business at a far higher rate than you would even imagine. How does cognitive bias come into play? Like I said, most of them are pushing information to you that you've already seen. So there's a particular opinion. You're constantly consuming information from that particular publication. So you're reading conformatively. It's called confirmation bias. You're confirming your existing bias with more and more information that you're adding to that bias that already exists from the same spaces that you got it from. Blaming outside factors when things don't go your way. This is something that we've fairly seen in a fair number of situations. Because you want to dissociate yourself from what is happening to you, so you decide that it's the environment that's causing the issue. And when you look at that kind of a bias when it plays into, again, the customer experience realm, it again makes you look at things and wonder really, where is this trade-off there? Attributing other people's success to luck, but taking personal credit for your own accomplishments. Again, from a brand's perspective, from a consumer perspective, it again puts a lens onto you to wonder really, what is the mechanics of measurement and ROI and treatment that we're doing? Assuming that everyone else shares your opinion or beliefs and learning a little about a topic, then assuming you know there is everything that there is to know about it, you know. AI can really help identify and reduce the impact of human bias, but it can also make the problem worse by baking in and deploying biases at scale in sensitive application areas. So can we use AI to really counter what AI is doing to itself in the current form and manner? Yes. But in the current form and manner, are we ready or are we doing enough to push it to the other side? Not yet. So it creeps into algorithms in many ways. Basically, decisions are being made with data, right? Like I said, data sets, anecdotes, human decisions historically, the iniquities that it studied over time in terms of the data that's fed into it, gender, race, sexual orientation, all of these things are all innately human biases that are all fed into the system currently. So the algorithms pick up from there. So there are disparate benefits from improved prediction that comes in. So as you're improving your prediction, it's important to understand the impact of that prediction and how real or authentic that prediction is. Several cognitive biases that are built into AI algorithms are innocuous, but the problem is your business outcomes can get massively impacted if you're not careful. I will walk you through what some of those could be, especially in e-commerce contexts. So what happens is the more biased an AI system gets, the less important it becomes to business. It's the same diversity and inclusion construct. The reason we go through conscious, unconscious bias training is so that we don't bring our biases to the table, because bias actually locks out your worldview. It gives you a very blinkered view of the world, and it's the same for AI. The more biased your system, the more threat or risk your business is at. So the value of AI that's not biased, while it can be incredible for business, biased AI can actually derail your business. So when you look at algorithms and when you look at the way they function, you realize that the kind of cost that goes into it, the kind of effort that goes into it, if you're going to build a microcosm of what already exists to fight what we want to change, it is again counterintuitive, and that again brings in a context. Give me 2 more minutes and I'll wrap up. Do I have 2 more minutes? Yeah. So if you look at your bias reduction measures currently, they are few and far between, because the excitement around AI is so high that there is so much of conversation going on about it, but are there really ways and means of cost of decision making or impact of psychology of human nature and all of these little packets that are coming together to give you really this context of saying, okay, what is it that we can do? And to answer that question, I'm going to go jump a little bit. So there is social proof. That is, social proof is somebody, let's say I like a celebrity is endorsing something, then I'm going to buy or make a choice based on what that endorsement is to want to buy, because that's affinity. I feel affinity towards that. There is a choice overload, which is today the kind of choices that you're presented with can also impact your buying patterns, your nature as a consumer, so it's important to look at that. It's important to look at the goal gradient effect, because what is the goal gradient effect? If you have a loyalty program and if there's a goal that you can attain, the idea is to lead, like for instance, Myntra has some of these, Google has some of these ways of sort of incentivizing you towards more buying and all of that. So these are 3 ways where biases can creep in at the buying stage. And it's important to look at the legal, social, ethical responsibility that brands have to ensure that they navigate this space of customers and ensuring that there is no bias that's connected to it. You can put your energy into creativity, imagination, strategy. There is AI data available to do that. There's also ability for us to look at advantageous use. There are multiple biases that are found to create decision-making problems. So when you look at insight, segmentation, orchestration, execution of your plans, what you need to know is you need to be aware of your data set. You need to know where your data set is coming from. How do you manage this? There are simple ways to do it. One is to be aware. The minute you know confirmation bias, affinity bias, cognitive bias, and you know what these biases are, you can start making decisions based on the awareness that you've built through it. You can fix them by ensuring that data sets are stripped of areas, especially statistically, that could potentially skew your data. And once you remove the skews of your data that's biased, your data becomes a data set that's neutral. A neutralized data set is always better to work with. From an advantage point of view, it's about looking at developing a good data culture. That means to say that you sanitize the data in such a form and manner that it supports your business decisions. You leverage team assessments to see who are the people in the room making the decisions, and if not, sensitize them, at least ensure that you pick a diverse set that's wide enough to ensure that elimination of bias happens because of the diversity of the team. Creating the collective perspectives, which is knowing yourself. I think it's important for us, especially as we put dollars and dollars into this industry, to try and see where those changes can happen from. When you're constantly checking, your organization can develop awareness. There's education processes, training programs that can actually help people taking these decisions and sitting at these tables to do what they do. Again, diverse teams. I think that's something that's parallel for all kinds of, ensuring bias is limited and minimal. Inclusion of thoughts, ideas, transparency in algorithms, and immersing in these conversations, because how many of you have had a conversation around bias in the room while taking a marketing decision? That's something to ask and question. Here is some data. I'm out of time, but there are a few ways to look at reducing AI-based biases from impacting what you're taking as decisions as customer service and customer experience executives in the room. So I think the prerogative is to take that onus and to really drive that down to the teams that we work with. And that's my time.